Um, do you think that kind of the next evolution of digital transformation and kind of how it affects our lives and how it affects marketing and so on, do you think it's going to be driven by hardware? Or do you think it's going to be driven by content, platforms, etc.? Because if we kind of look back at Google, you know, actually cardboard was a really interesting kind of play on hardware, which maybe we can talk to, but
Yeah.
also Google Glass, which, people remember, as being a bit of a forerunner in terms of wearable devices. So in this point in time, this kind of inflection point, what's going to be more important, do you think, to changing the state of digital hardware or content?
Yeah, I think my answer is going to be a bit of a cop out, but I would say that this is just to go back to first principles and understand why does something need to exist in the first place, right? And I think if we go back to mobile, um, that conversation that happened 10 years ago around, if a company is raising money, they might say, we're building a mobile app to do X, Y, Z, right? Like what Uber might have said, at the time. Now we don't really speak in those terms. It's just a thing to do. It's a job to be done, right? And we don't really think about the format itself. We don't really think about whether it's hardware enabled or what kind of software runs it. It's just a thing to be done. And I think a lot of the challenges I saw at the time around AR and VR was that it was overly focused on this kind of technocratic approach of we need this hardware to be this way, or we need more content, or whatever it is. And I think by focusing too much on the nitty-gritty of what actually enables this technology, we sometimes lose sight of like the big why of why does this need to exist and what does it actually enable. So I think it's probably a combination of both. Obviously,
Yeah.
at times we're clearly constrained by hardware, right? Like when we're doing early prototypes for some of the Google hardware, we clearly saw that, well, if our vision for this is to be an all-day device that needs to be light, good-looking, with good optics and displays and all that kind of stuff, we are clearly constrained on the hardware side because you could only probably wear that thing for 30 minutes or something, and I'm not really sure and again, there are trade-offs, right? So maybe you want it to be much more like what Meta is doing with their glasses, where it's more of a singular use case and it's not a kind of an all-in-one kind of thing. And I think that's an interesting way to look at it, right? Figure out what is the minimum viable kind of job to be done and go from there. And so I think keeping the end user and having this kind of very empathetic user-centric approach from the outside is super important, so that we don't fixate too much on we need content or we need hardware to be like this, right? So I think if you remember from like our days at, your days at Jaunton and what we were doing at Google, some of the thesis we had was around we need content, right? We need content for people to be using this thing. But actually the problem to be solved was maybe not so much around content, but like what kind of content actually works well, or does it need to be 360, right? Like that was one insight we had as well, right? It was like, does it need to be 360? It can just be 180 because, well, no one is actually looking all the way around. And so I feel like those kinds of experimental learnings are super important because they actually dictate and they go back to the user needs, and they become less about solving something very specific, but really figuring out why, like the big why behind something.
Yeah, but I completely agree. But equally, the challenge to that is that sometimes technology enables new things. So I remember when I was involved in the launch of EE, the telco, first 4G telco in the UK, and the kind of the strapline for EE was now you can, and it was all around what 4G would enable. So now you can have a video call with your grandma. Now you can shop on the bus. Now you can watch catch up TV on the go, whatever. And so I think that what do you think in terms of kind of, yes, there's the understanding of the problem statement and thinking about how technology can solve that. And that's very much kind of in the realm of what people are doing today. But in a kind of 5 to 10 year time frame, do you think that technology, whether it be hardware, software, operating systems, applications, whatever it is, do you think that it will change significantly, that it actually shifts the dial in terms of how people use technology in their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the long term, again, I think that's a really valid point to bring in, because I think it all depends on time scale, right? Like right now, I think we are in this very nascent stage still. If you zoom out, 10 years from now, we clearly will have the tech, and we'll probably have these glasses that we'll wear, and that will enable a bunch of different use cases.